My parents left for Italy. My mother spent 40 minutes taking photos of her luggage. Not packing it. Photographing it. Arranged on the bed in matching sets, the tags still attached, a glass of sparkling water on the nightstand as a prop. She posted 3 of them before the Uber arrived. She did not come to say goodbye to me. I was 13 years old, sitting at the kitchen table in Charlotte, North Carolina, eating a bowl of cereal I had made myself, listening to the sound of rolling suitcases cross the hardwood floor in the entryway. My father passed through the kitchen once. He set a white envelope on the table without making eye contact and said, "There's money in there if you need something." Then he followed my mother out the door. I heard the car pull away. I waited a few minutes the way you wait after you think you hear thunder to see if it was real. Then I opened the envelope. $35. 3 tens and a 5, folded around a debit card with a post-it note in my mother's handwriting that said emergencies only, do not abuse this. The card had my mother's name on it, not mine. I put it in my pocket and finished my cereal. We lived in a pale gray craftsman house on a quiet street in the Dilworth neighborhood, the kind of street where the lawns were maintained and the neighbors waved but mostly kept to themselves. My mother, whose name was Patricia, but who introduced herself as Trish to anyone whose opinion she wanted, had built a modest but carefully managed presence online around what she called mindful living. Organized pantries. Wellness routines. Aspirational quotes in clean fonts over photos of our kitchen at golden hour. She had a little over 14,000 followers when she left for Italy. She checked the number the way other people check their blood pressure. My father, whose name was Glenn, worked in commercial real estate. He traveled often, spoke little, and had the particular skill of being present in a room without contributing to it. He was not a cruel man. He was the kind of man who watches something wrong happen and decides it is not his place to interfere. I had been managing myself in small ways since I was about 9. I knew how to reheat leftovers and how to write my own absence notes by copying my mother's handwriting. I knew which neighbors would ask too many questions and which ones would smile and move on. I had learned to read the specific silence that meant my mother did not want to be interrupted, and the different silence that meant she had already decided something and was waiting for me to figure out what it was. I thought this was normal. I thought every child kept a running inventory of how much space they were taking up and adjusted accordingly. 2 weeks before they left, my mother called me into the living room and told me about the trip, the way someone tells you about a schedule change that affects them far more than it affects you. Her college roommate was getting married in Positano. They had rented a villa with 4 other couples. 3 weeks, she said, counting on her fingers as if the math required effort. You're 13. You're perfectly capable. I asked about Grandma. She lives in Phoenix, my mother said, as if geography was the only factor. I asked about Aunt Diane, who was 2 hours away in Raleigh. There was a pause. The length of a held breath. Diane and your father are not on the best terms right now, she said. Which was not an answer. My father was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. I looked at him directly. He looked past me at something on the far wall and said, "It's only 3 weeks," which was the most he said about the entire arrangement. I did not ask again. I had learned early that pressing for a different answer usually only changed the tone of the same answer. The debit card stopped working on day 3. I found out at the Walgreens 2 blocks from our house, trying to buy a box of crackers and a jar of almond butter. Listening to the cashier read me the decline message with the flat patience of someone who has read that message many times. I left the almond butter. I kept the crackers and paid the $3 in change in cash and walked home. I called my mother that evening. I could hear noise behind her voice, something that sounded like an outdoor restaurant. Waves maybe, other voices. "Mom, the card isn't working. I can't buy groceries." There was a pause. "The card should be fine," she said. "You're probably entering the PIN wrong." "There isn't a PIN," I said. "It just declines." She exhaled, slow and controlled, the exhale that always meant she was about to reframe the situation in a way that made the problem mine. "You have $35, she said. "That is more than enough if you're not wasteful. Figure it out." She hung up. That night I opened her account on my laptop. New post, 3 hours ago. My mother at a long table draped in white linen. candles in terracotta holders, a sunset behind her that looked almost impossible. The caption said some tables you never want to leave with a location tag for a restaurant in Ravello that I looked up and found charged $90 per person for the tasting menu. I sat with that for a while. Then I got up and went through the pantry with a notebook and wrote down everything we had. 2 packs of ramen, a half box of pasta, a can of chickpeas, some condiments, rice. I counted my cash. $32 remained. 3 weeks was 21 days. I did the arithmetic twice to make sure I had it right. About $1.50 per day. I went to the Harris Teeter the next morning when it opened and stood in the dry goods aisle for a long time. I bought more ramen, a bag of rice, dried lentils, a loaf of bread, and a jar of peanut butter. I carried it home in a reusable bag and put everything on the counter and portioned it out on paper the way I had seen a video do it once for emergency budgeting. 1 portion ramen in the morning, rice and lentils at night, peanut butter on bread when I was still hungry. I told myself this was fine. I told myself 3 weeks was not that long. I believed the first thing more than the second. On day 6, I got my period for only the second time in my life and realized I had nothing in the house for it, and $11 left in cash and nothing I could do about the card. I walked to the dollar store and spent $4 and stood in the bathroom when I got home and cried for the first time since they had left. Not dramatically. Just the quiet kind where you sit on the tile and don't make noise because there's no one to hear it anyway. That same evening there was a knock at the front door. My neighbor from across the street was a woman named Eleanor Marsh. She was 68, recently retired from 30 years teaching middle school science, and had the particular quality of people who have spent decades reading rooms full of children, who do not always say what is wrong. She had noticed, she told me later, that the lights in our house had been the same lights for several days, that the car hadn't moved, that she had not seen my mother in nearly a week, and had not seen me leave for school. "Are your parents home?" she asked when I opened the door. I said they were traveling. She looked at me the way Miss Marsh looked at things, with the patience of someone who has seen children try to protect adults from the truth about those adults. She said she had made too much soup and asked if I wanted some. I said I was fine. She said she would bring it anyway. She came back in 10 minutes with a container of chicken soup and a sleeve of crackers and set them on my kitchen counter without comment. She looked at the pantry which I had left open and at the small pile of ramen and the near-empty peanut butter jar. She did not say anything about any of it. She sat down at the table and asked when they were coming back. 21 days total, I said. It's been 6. She nodded slowly. Do you have money for food? She asked. Not really, I said. And that was the first true thing I had said out loud since they left. She told me she would bring something every day and that I did not need to pretend otherwise. She said she was not going to call anyone yet, but that I should keep track of everything. Write it down, she said. Dates. What you ate. What you spent. Whether anyone checked on you. She paused and added that if anything happened, if I got sick or felt unsafe, I should come to her immediately, day or night, and she would call whoever needed to be called. She came back every day. Sometimes soup. Once a whole pan of baked pasta. She sat with me while I ate and asked about school, and did not push on the things I was not ready to say. She was doing what she always did, I understood later, which was being a witness. Making sure someone knew. I started recording on day 8. I had an old phone my parents had replaced, still on our Wi-Fi, and I propped it against the dish rack in the kitchen and pressed record. I said the date. I showed the refrigerator, which held a container of Eleanor's leftover soup and nothing else. I showed the pantry. I showed the declined card holding it up to the camera. I said how much cash I had left. I was not performing. I was doing what Eleanor had told me, which was keeping a record, because I had understood from the way she said it that a record was the kind of thing that mattered later, even if you didn't know yet exactly how. On day 11, I nearly fainted in PE class. I had not eaten since the night before because I had miscounted my portions and had run out of rice a day early. I sat down on the gym floor during a warm-up drill, and the teacher, Ms. Kovacs, was beside me before I fully understood what was happening. She walked me to the nurse's office, and the nurse, a calm woman named Sandra, had me lie down and asked a series of questions. When did you last eat? Do you have food at home? Where are your parents? I said I had eaten lunch. I said we had food. I said my parents were traveling for work. I answered each question carefully the way you answer questions you have been afraid of, which is to say, I lied in the most believable direction. Sandra wrote things on a clipboard. She did not argue with me, but she called the school counselor, a man named Mr. Okafor, and the three of them were in the room together for a moment, and something passed between the adults over my head that I recognized without being able to name. Mr. Okafor sat with me after Sandra stepped out. He asked the questions again, differently, more slowly. He had the quality of someone who was not going to be satisfied with the version I had prepared. I told him more than I meant to, not everything, but enough. He said, "Thank you for telling me." He said, "I want you to know you're not in trouble." He said, "We're going to figure out what you need." My mother called that evening. The school left a message, she said. Her voice lower than usual, the register she used when she had already decided the nature of the conversation. "What did you tell them?" I said, "I told them you were traveling." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want you to listen to me very carefully." She said if I told anyone anything about the money or the card or the length of the trip, she would pull me out of school when she got back and put me in a residential program in the mountains where children who could not be trusted learned to manage themselves. She said she had already looked into it. She said she was not making an empty threat. I said yes. I said I understood. I hung up and stood in the kitchen with my hands pressed flat on the counter for a while. Then I got the old phone and propped it against the dish rack again and pressed record. I said the date. I said my mother had just called. I said what she had told me, word for word, without inflection, the way you repeat something when you want to make sure you have it right. I described the call. I described what she had said she would do. I held the phone up to my ear and replayed the voicemail she had left before I picked up, which I had not deleted, and I let the recording capture her voice saying it again. I did not cry. There was a particular state I had moved into by that point that was beyond crying, past the part of upset where your body wants to express it, and into the part where you are simply recording data. I documented 19 consecutive days. I showed the grocery receipts arranged by date. I filmed the bathroom scale the morning after Eleanor brought pasta, which read 7 pounds less than it had the day they left, and I said the number out loud to the camera. I filmed the pantry at various stages. I let the old phone sit in the windowsill one afternoon while I ate alone at the table, and I stayed in frame the entire meal, not for drama but because Eleanor had told me that evidence is what gets believed and I had taken that seriously. On day 19, the school filed a report. I know now that it was Mr. Okafor who initiated it, citing the nurse's notes, his own interview documentation, and a teacher observation log that Ms. Kovacs had quietly added to over 2 weeks. I did not know it at the time. I came home from school on day 19 to find a woman sitting in a car parked in front of our house who got out when she saw me and introduced herself as Brenda Holloway from Mecklenburg County Child Protective Services. She was matter-of-fact without being cold, which I appreciated. She walked through the house with me and asked questions and wrote things down. She looked at the pantry, she looked at the refrigerator, she asked about the card, and I showed it to her and she asked if I knew whether it had been activated. I told her what I had been told by the Walgreens cashier on day 3. She asked if there was anything else I wanted to show her. I brought her the phone. She sat at the kitchen table and watched all 19 videos without stopping them. When the last one ended, she put the phone down and folded her hands and looked at me. She said, "You documented this very carefully." She said it matters. Then she asked the question that no adult had asked me directly before that moment. "Do you feel safe here?" she said. I said no. She said okay. She said she was going to make some calls. The legal case that assembled itself over the following week was thorough and not particularly favorable to my parents. The school medical record showed the weight loss and the nurse's documentation. The subpoena of the debit card account confirmed what the cashier had told me on day 3. that the card had been flagged for non-payment 14 days before my parents left for Italy and had been in a declined status before they ever handed it to me. This was not an accident. An account note from the bank's automated system showed the card had been attempted and failed 3 days before their departure, which meant my father had known when he set that envelope on the kitchen table. Miss Harpo Holloway also confirmed through my parents' travel credit card records that they had spent just under $38,000 during the 3 weeks they were gone. $38,000. And $35 in an envelope for me. My mother flew home on a Tuesday. She had planned a welcome home dinner at a restaurant downtown, a reservation for 12, their closest friends, the kind of dinner that would generate photographs. My father had flown back 2 days earlier to handle something at work and had come to the house briefly. He had not called me or texted me the entire time he was gone, but when he walked in he said I heard the school got involved and looked at me with something that might have been guilt, or might have been calculation. It was hard to tell. He said Patty is going to be upset. I said I know. He went upstairs and I did not see him again that night. My mother's flight landed at 3 in the afternoon. She had posted a photo at the gate in Rome with the caption "Homeward Bound." But Italy will always have a piece of my heart. She had 14,400 followers by then, 200 more than when she left. She went directly from the airport to the restaurant to meet her friends. Miss Holloway and a Mecklenburg County detective named Officer Pratt were waiting in the restaurant parking lot when her Uber pulled in. My mother got out in a blue silk dress she had bought in Naples and looked at them the way she looked at things that had not been scheduled. She smiled first. The reflex smile. The one that bought her a second to process. She said there must be some kind of misunderstanding. Officer Pratt explained calmly that they had a warrant for her arrest on charges of child endangerment and negligent child abuse. He explained it the way he had explained it to many people before, without drama, which I think bothered her more than drama would have. Her friends were visible through the restaurant window. Some of them were watching. A woman named Kara, who had been my mother's closest friend for 11 years and who had double-tapped approximately 400 of her Italy posts over the past 3 weeks, pressed her hand to her mouth. My mother started to say something about her attorney. She started to explain that I was mature for my age, that I had always been self-sufficient, that the school had blown a minor situation entirely out of proportion. Officer Pratt listened to all of it. Then he showed her a screenshot of one of my videos on his phone, specifically the one from day 15 where I held the near-empty peanut butter jar up to the camera and said quietly, "I have $3 left and my mother posted from a boat tour this afternoon." My mother stood in the parking lot of the restaurant in her blue Naples dress and was quiet for a long time. The restaurant kept her reservation. Her friends sat at the table for a while. I was told later by Cara, who called my Aunt Diane that evening in a state of distress. No one ate much. Someone eventually asked for the check. Both my parents accepted plea agreements 4 months later. My father pled to a misdemeanor charge of negligent supervision with 200 hours of community service and 2 years supervised probation. My mother pled to a felony charge of child endangerment. The judge sentenced her to 90 days in county, suspended to 60 served, plus 3 years probation, mandatory parenting classes, and a permanent felony record. The family court hearing was the same week. The judge? A woman named Judge Caulfield, who had the quality of someone who had heard everything and was not moved by volume, read her termination order in a measured voice and signed it without ceremony. My mother's attorney asked the judge to consider my mother's role in the community and her lack of prior record. Judge Caulfield said she had considered it. She signed the order. Aunt Diane had submitted her guardianship petition the week before. The court approved it the same morning. I moved to Raleigh on a Thursday in November with 2 duffel bags and a box of books. Diane's apartment had a second bedroom with a window that faced a courtyard where someone had planted rosemary along the fence line. She had made up the bed with a comforter she had clearly bought specifically for this and had put a small lamp on the nightstand and a note that said, "Welcome home, no rush on anything." I stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. She did not treat me like a project or a burden or a story she was managing. She knocked before she came into my room. She asked what I wanted for dinner and then actually made it. She came to every school event for 3 years and wrote them all on a paper calendar in the kitchen in blue marker, the kind of calendar that someone fills in because they plan to be there. The first time I forgot to text her when I got to a friend's house, she called twice and then texted, "Are you okay?" And I stood in my friend's living room and stared at those 3 words for probably longer than made sense. It was not that no one had ever asked. It was that I had never understood before that the question could be simple, that it could just mean what it said. I am 26 now. I graduated from NC State 2 years ago with a degree in social work and a concentration in child welfare. I work for a family services nonprofit in Raleigh where I do intake assessments for children in situations that, in various forms and at various intensities, I recognize. Mr. Okafor came to my graduation. Eleanor Marsh sent a card with a check inside and a note that said, "I always knew you were keeping track of the right things." My mother has written to me 4 times through the court system since the termination. She is in therapy. She understands, she says, the magnitude of what she did. She is working on herself. The most recent letter said she hopes I know that despite everything she does love me, and then she wrote, and I credit her for this, that she understands she has no standing to expect anything from me in return for saying so. I have read every letter twice. I keep them in a folder in my desk. I have not written back. I don't know yet whether I will. What I know is that the decision belongs entirely to me, and that sounds simple, but it took me the better part of a decade to understand that it was something I was allowed to have. She left me with $35 and a card she knew was blocked, and the unspoken expectation that I had been prepared well enough to be abandoned quietly. She was right about one part, which was that I had been prepared. She was wrong about what for. I have sat across the table from children who have learned the same lesson I learned, the one that gets taught to you in the specific silence of being edited out, being managed, being told that your value is in your low maintenance, in how little you ask for, in how well you absorb absence without inconveniencing anyone. I know what that education looks like from the inside. I know the particular arithmetic of it, the way you learn to divide your needs into the ones that are allowed and the ones that you carry alone and never name. I want to ask you something. If you've made it this far, have you ever been taught that wanting things was a burden you were placing on someone else? That speaking up cost more than staying quiet? That the most useful thing you could be was someone who required very little? What did you do with that? Not the version you tell people, the real version. Some of us figured it out slowly and at a cost that took years to fully calculate. But I want you to know something I wish someone had told me on day 1 of those 19 days, eating half a pack of ramen at a kitchen table while my mother posted from a rooftop in Positano. The silence was never protecting you. It was only ever protecting the people who needed you to keep it.